I'm super excited to be here at Schema, our first ever conference focused on design systems. When I first found out we were doing this conference, I was really excited because design systems are so important to how we think about Figma and our community. And in fact, it's probably not an exaggeration to say that it's the most important thing we think about as we design Figma the product. So we've got a great lineup of speakers who are going to share everything that they know about design systems. But what I thought I could do is I thought I could kick things off by talking a little bit about 3 different points in time where I learned some things and how they affected how we at Figma think about design systems. So 3 different eras. And to start with that, I'm going to take you back to February of 1997. Close your eyes and picture this. Okay, so I want you to actually think about yourself and imagine that you're in 1997. Okay, so the top song in the US is Wannabe by Spice Girls. There's something exciting that's happening. It's called the web. People are experimenting with it, but most companies don't even have a website. The layer tag has just been invented. The CSS working group has just been started at the W3C. Facebook and Google don't even exist, right? There aren't even web apps. Most websites are actually just content. So there are magazines like Hotwired. There are landing pages for companies. So that's what the web looks like. And you know, it's exciting, but we don't even know, is the web here to stay? Is it just a fad? Is it going to go away in a few years? For people who are designing on mobile, you might be thinking, well, what was mobile like in 97? Well, in 1997, the iPhone didn't exist. Not only that, it wouldn't exist for 10 more years. Same with Android, right? Flip phones had actually just come out. Flip phones came out in 1996. So that's 1997, and that's where the story starts. And in February of 1997, I decided to join this team. So this is a group of people at a company called Macromedia, and we were working on a project to create a design tool for the web, right? So I said earlier, you know, some people, it was exciting, everybody knew it was exciting, but some people thought it was going to stay, some people thought it was a fad, we thought it was going to stay, and we wanted to make a tool. Our team's vision for what a tool like a tool for HTML might look like is something like this. There are page layout tools for print, like PageMaker. We use InDesign today, but PageMaker was what was around back then. And we thought that we needed a design tool that was specific for HTML that was kind of like the PageMaker for the web, right? So, you know, that's kind of how we imagined it. And a lot of people had different opinions about what a design tool for HTML might look like. And one of the most common things that we heard was this. People were saying, well, you know, isn't HTML just like Postscript? Now, maybe that question makes sense to you, maybe not, I don't know. Postscript, I don't think we think about it a lot anymore. Maybe you think about it like it's the thing that, you know, my computer uses to talk to the printer, or maybe you think of it like it's in some kind of file somewhere, it's some kind of graphics format, maybe something like that. But really, Postscript looks like this. So Postscript is a fully fledged programming language. It's a stack-based language. It you know, has strong types. You can define functions. It's actually a really powerful language. And people used to use Postscript in order to do things like, you know, draw pictures using code. You can actually draw interesting diagrams. If you're into generative art, it's actually a super fun thing to play around with, so you should check it out. But Postscript is something that people literally would write programs for by hand. And then eventually what happened is that tools came around. And so, for example, if you're doing illustration, you could use Illustrator to draw your pictures. Or if you're doing graphing, there were, you know, graphing packages. If you're doing diagramming, there were diagramming tools, right? So after all of these tools came around, slowly it just wasn't, you know, it wasn't necessary to use Postscript anymore by hand, and so nobody ever programmed in Postscript anymore. And people were saying that the same thing was going to happen with HTML. They said, well, look, once you have a tool where you can just drag things around, why would you need to code in HTML by hand? But we had a different picture of how we thought things were going to go. We imagined that hand coding HTML markup and designing in a visual tool were going to go hand in hand. And so when we thought about Dreamweaver, we figured it was a sort of a complement to the hand coding. And then one last thing I want to say about this is there's one sort of deeper reason why the analogy to Postscript and Dreamweaver is a little bit different, which is that in a tool like Adobe Illustrator, when you draw something and it produces Postscript, you can't really go back and change the Postscript later and have it come back into Illustrator, right? So you're going to draw something. If you decided you're going to like put a computer program inside your Postscript, you can't like load it up in Illustrator and keep going. But that's actually the vision that we had for Dreamweaver, which is that you should be able to draw in Dreamweaver and then go into hand coding and then change the HTML however you wanted, and then go back into Dreamweaver and go back and forth and back and forth. And that's actually technically really difficult, right? So it means that whatever you do in HTML, you had to be able to do in Dreamweaver, and whatever you might change, you had to be able to represent, and then you had to be able to edit it. So that was a hard thing, but that was our vision. So with that vision, we asked a bunch of designers what they did in developing websites and what they needed, and they told us a bunch of things, right? So the early web was really text heavy. So we did a lot of text features. We made it possible to format your text and save text formats and do layout, figure out how you were going to put the text onto the page, line spacing, letter spacing, justification, all that stuff. People also cared a lot about reuse and consistency. And so we built features for that. This picture that you're seeing on the screen here is the assets panel. And the assets panel has things like reusable pictures, snippets of HTML that you can upload to a server and then share with your team. You can even customize those things, so you can put in slots into those pieces of HTML so that you have customizable parts and so on. So anyway, so the reason I'm showing you this picture is because some of these features are kind of like a primitive design systems features that you might see in a tool like Figma. We had text styles, we had color styles, we had reusable components, right? So this is almost like a prehistoric design system. And so after a bunch of late nights trying to make this dream happen, we eventually released Dreamweaver 1.0. And it was a huge hit. But the funny thing is that people weren't using it for design. So we thought we were building this. We thought we were building a tool to help people do the design part of web design. But it turns out that people were designing in Photoshop. And that felt really crazy to us. What people would do is they would design in Photoshop. They would draw a picture of their website in Photoshop. And then eventually they would then take that picture and they would redraw that picture in Dreamweaver. And then they would go into hand coding and they would adjust it in hand coding. And so that just seemed weird to us because people were doing their job twice. So to figure out what was happening, we had to go back and talk to designers again to understand really, well, why are you doing this? Why is this important to you? So this is sort of the mystery, right? What is Dreamweaver even for if people are doing their design in Photoshop? So as we talked to designers, this is what they told us. So imagine that you're building a web layout, and you might have something that looks something like this. You have an icon on the left, you've got some buttons on the right, and you need to figure out where's all this stuff going to go. Well, in Dreamweaver, remember I said one of Dreamweaver's goals was to say it can do anything that you can do in HTML. But the problem is that it can only do things that you can do in HTML. And so if I want to put these things to the right, I have to figure out, well, gee, I have to put some divs, I guess, here, and maybe I'll stretch this thing over here. I'll put this thing over here on the left with a float. I have to vertically center this thing. How am I going to do that? And so there's a lot of work that you had to do just to get things where you wanted them to be. And then after you get things where you want them to be, you would look at it and you say, well, I don't know if I like this. Maybe I want this over here. Well, OK, so now you have to tear everything apart, put it back together again in this new place. And so people were doing this over and over again in Dreamweaver. And eventually people said, this would be a lot easier if I just did this in a graphics tool. So in a tool like Photoshop, you just draw things and you grab them and you move them where you want. And actually, that's even easier in Fireworks, right? In Fireworks was actually super popular back then. And people would ask, well, why are people using Fireworks instead of Photoshop? It's literally because it's just easier to grab things and move them. So people would use graphics tools to draw things, move them, et cetera. And eventually their designs would settle down and they'd say, OK, looks pretty good. And at that point, they would say, OK, now that it looks good, let's add some structure. And so that's what people were using Dreamweaver for. So they would design in Photoshop. But then once they got to a point where they needed to add structure, they would do that in Dreamweaver. And then they would go to code to do the finishing touches. So what we learned is that there were two different things going on. There's a time for freeform design, and there's a time for structure. And the way that I think about it is that it's kind of like the way your brain works. Now, this is kind of an oversimplification, but the right side of your brain, it's really good at seeing connections, being inspired, being creative, doing things that are a little bit different, noticing patterns. And the left brain is really good at structuring things. So for example, the way your visual system works, you look around and you don't see just like a bunch of shadows and a bunch of colors. You see things like that's a table and that's a lamp and so on. And that processing, that structuring of things, largely happens with your left brain. And your left brain is also good at logic and thinking and connecting things. And so the logical part of your brain, the left brain, is kind of like the structured design phase. And so that was kind of the biggest takeaway that we had from 1997, which is that there's actually two different processes for design: the unstructured freeform process and the structured process. Okay, so now let's mentally time travel from 1997 all the way to the summer of 2015. So in 2015, the design industry is a lot different, right? It's progressed a lot, and it's in a really exciting place. So first off, #1 song in the US in 2015, summer of 2015, is I Can't Feel My Face by The Weeknd. Web and mobile have taken over everything, right? So before the web was new, we weren't sure it was going to stay. Now it's everywhere. Design teams, they used to be sort of an afterthought. You would write the software, then maybe hire a design team at the end. Well, design teams are bigger and they're more important than ever at every single company. There's a new design tool coming out every week, and companies are really treating design as part of their core strategy. So it's a super fun time to be in the world of design. And this is the year that I joined this team. And just like with Dreamweaver, the team at Figma, we had a vision for what we wanted to do. So the first thing, which is pretty obvious, is that we had a vision that the tool should be in the browser. And some people are pretty skeptical of this. They're saying, well, is it going to be fast enough? Is it going to look okay? Is it going to crash, et cetera? So there's some doubt, but that's something that we believe in. And then we also think that the tool needs to be collaborative, that we need to allow lots of people to work together. And people are definitely skeptical of this. They're saying, well, I don't want somebody looking over my shoulder as I'm designing, right? I don't want to design by committee. And so these are two core parts of our vision. And then we have a third part of our vision, which is that we see Figma as being a tool for both freeform design and structured design. We think that it's for both the left brain and the right brain. Okay, now what was the conversation like in 2015 around design? Well, there's a lot of buzz around things like atomic design, Google's material design system, Salesforce's lightning design system, right? So design systems are this thing that's happening and that people are talking about. And even though it's really, really early in our team's process, we decide that we're going to double down on design systems. And there's a couple reasons for this, right? I mean, just to give you a sense of how early it was, people were asking for things like, can we have guides on our rulers, which every single design tool in the history of design tools has. And we were like, well, okay, guides are good, but we kind of want to think about design systems. So one of the reasons why this was important to us is because we wanted to build a tool that was good for both freeform design and structured design. The structured design is that pink circle. And design systems just seemed like a perfect fit for that structured design part. The other reason we wanted to double down in design systems is whenever we would talk to design systems managers, it was like we were talking to kindred spirits. And what I mean by that is this, is at Figma, we don't really think about our job as being to make a tool, really. At the end of our day, our job is to help designers do their work better, right? We want to help designers do more creative work, do it faster, do it, just be happier as they do their work. And if you think about it, that's also what design systems managers are doing. They're building things for their teams to be able to work faster, more efficiently, more safely, and be happier. And so it's almost like we're building the same kind of thing, right? If you look at this picture, it's like Figma is building this shell. Figma is building the part that is on the outside, and the design systems managers, they're building the part that's on the inside, the components and the assets and so on that people use in order for everybody to be able to design better and to be faster and so on. Okay, so because of that, we really decided to double down on design systems. And the first thing we had is we had components, we had constraints, we had team library, we had variants, styles, interactive components, on and on and on, right? We had all these different features. And what happens is because of all those features, now we've got a lot of structure. There's a lot of ways to make the system more rigid and foolproof, kind of like Legos. But we also know that freeform design is equally important. So how do we maintain this balance between structured design and freeform design? So sometimes this stuff, sometimes it comes from planning and sometimes it just sort of reveals itself over time. But as we work on our features, we start developing a principle. And the principle is one of the most important principles we have now at Figma, which is that freeform and structured approaches to design are both equally important, and our job is just to help you move fluidly between those two modes. So here's an example. If you think about UI design, a lot of times you have a bunch of things that are spaced in even ways. And when you're in the freeform mode, we have a feature called Smart Select, right? So Smart Select helps you work as you're in that freeform mode. And then once you're happy with your design, you can lock it down into a more structured mode with auto layout. And if you change your mind, you can actually undo that auto layout and go back to freeform. For colors, same thing. So when you're working with colors, before you've decided what colors you want to use, you just use colors. But then to make that process faster and more efficient, we have this feature called selection colors. And then eventually, once you've decided how you want to use your colors, you can lock that down with color styles. So these are just pairs of features that I'm not sure if you've noticed the relationship between them, but the way that we think about it is that they're sort of like the structured and unstructured versions of the same feature. So whether you're in a left brain mood or right brain mood, we want your workflow and your process to be as smooth as possible, right? That's sort of our philosophy. Okay, so that's 2015. I want to take us back from 2015 all the way to 2021, which is the world of today. I actually had to look up what the top song was because I don't know it. Apparently it's My Universe by BTS and Coldplay. I've never actually heard this song. It's probably great. I don't know it, sorry. Design systems now, before it was a new thing, and now they're kind of everywhere, It's still early, but they've really, progressed a lot since 2015. And I'm not going to tell you the rest, you know what today is like, but that's, 2021. And in 2021, instead of talking about tooling, I want to talk a little bit about design systems and where design systems are in 2021. So earlier, I mentioned that I think of my job at Figma and your job as a design systems manager as basically being pretty similar. We're both just building stuff to help designers do their work. And because our work is so similar, it's really not surprising that some of the tensions that we noticed between freeform design and structure, some of that stuff is a tension that I also see with design systems, right? So I talk to design systems managers a lot, and one of the things I hear is that they spend all of this time creating an amazing design system for their users, and then people detach instances, right? They find a way out, or maybe they override things they're not supposed to override, or maybe they just pull colors out of thin air that they're not supposed to. And it's understandable that this is frustrating, and a lot of times it's not the right thing, right? Like the design system's there for a good reason. You want design consistency. You want to make sure that things can be built correctly in prod. You need to worry about accessibility and make sure that's handled, right? So there's a good reason why the design system exists, and yet there's also this need for, well, what about the right brain? What about the times when you really need to just be creative and just try things out and not worry so much about that structure? So my thought here is that maybe instead of discouraging this kind of thinking, that sometimes we need to embrace it. Okay, so here's how I see things in 2021. Figma has gotten pretty good at helping people move back and forth between freeform design and structured design. Design systems, I think that's an area that we could explore, right? I think I'm not sure exactly what that looks like, but that feels like something that we might be able to make better. And meanwhile, design systems have gotten really good at helping people move between structured design and code. And that's an area where Figma, I think, frankly, we need to think a little bit about. Maybe that could be better in Figma. But the funny thing is that all of these three phases, the freeform design, the structured design, and the coding, and putting things into production, all three of those things are things that Figma cares about, and they're also things that design systems managers care about. So maybe there's some better way that we can combine all of this, so it's easy to just do all of it. So I'm going to ask you two questions. First of all, that's what's on my mind. Maybe there are other things on your mind about design systems and how to make them better. But whatever it is, how can design systems be better? That's question number one. And then question number two is, who's going to make it better? So to answer that second question, I have something to tell you which might sound a little bit corny, but I want you to bear with me on this. Okay. So I started this whole talk with some stories about my early days, and I talked about what things were like then and how things have changed since back then to now. And some of you, when I told my story, you might have thought to yourself, man, I wonder what it was like back then. It would have been fun to be in the early days and maybe to play a little bit of part in how things are today. And even this picture, which is not that long ago, right? You might look at that picture and say, gosh, design systems have changed a lot. They were just starting then. And what would it have been like to be there in the early days? That would have been pretty cool. But the corny thing, okay, I told you this was corny, but I totally believe this with my heart. The corny thing is that if you look at this picture, I can guarantee you nobody in this picture is thinking to themselves, man, I'm living in the old days now. Right? It never feels like the early days. When we were in this picture, we thought it was now, and we thought that everything had been done, and we were just trying to do a little bit more or whatever. And then it's only 5 or 10 or 20 years later, when you look back at those pictures, that's when you say, man, those were the early days. And the fact of the matter is, it is the early days for design systems, and right now, people like you are literally the ones who are figuring out how we're going to design in the future. Right? Design systems are going to change a lot over the next 10 years, and people like you are going to make it happen. So right now is the early days. So I want you to think about that as you listen to the talks of this conference. And then I want to leave you with one final note, which is about change. Change doesn't have to be big. So you're going to hear some ideas at this conference, and maybe you'll go back to your team and you'll come up with some kind of small tweak for how you organize your own design system. That work might feel small, but it's going to help the people at your company do their jobs a little bit better. And that work matters. It matters to the people you work with, and it matters to the world. And so, maybe after that, you're going to take that idea and you're going to share it with somebody else at another company, and that idea is going to spark another idea, and slowly those ideas start spreading. And then pretty soon, each of these little pieces of inspiration are going to turn into a big shift in how we all work. Because I think that this is how change happens, right? Big change never happens all at once. It's never one person who comes up with a huge idea all at once. Change comes from all of us working together, advancing things forward, one small step at a time. And thank you so much. I hope you have a great rest of your day.